on my show, we look for people who are taking a non-traditional approach to dealing with that issue, and we've profiled dozens of them.
Just moments ago, jaw-dropping details about what really happened behind the cameras of Dirty Jobs have finally come to light. After years of silence, members of Mike Rowe's loyal crew are stepping forward with stories that completely change how fans see the beloved TV host. What was once thought to be a light-hearted look at America's toughest jobs now appears to have carried shocking dangers, emotional sacrifices, and secrets the audience never imagined. From terrifying near-death experiences to raw human moments that were edited out, this new revelation exposes the side of Dirty Jobs that no one was ever meant to see. According to the crew, what Mike endured and the choices he made when the cameras stopped rolling will leave viewers speechless. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why his crew says he didn't just host the show, he survived it. Stick around to uncover the untold truth about Mike Rowe's most dangerous days. When Dirty Jobs first premiered in 2003, nobody expected it to become a cultural movement. The idea was simple: showcase the dirtiest, most grueling, and often overlooked jobs in America, the ones no one else wanted to talk about. But as Mike Rowe and his small crew soon realized, what they had signed up for wasn't a typical TV show. It was a journey into the heart of real American labor, filled with unpredictable dangers and unforgettable people. Crew members later revealed that the show was never as scripted as audiences assumed. There were no rehearsals, no second takes, and no fancy setups. Once the camera started rolling, anything could happen. And it usually did. From the very beginning, Mike insisted on total authenticity. He refused to use stunt doubles or cut corners. If a worker was knee-deep in a pig pen, Mike would be right there with them. If a sewer worker had to crawl through waist-high sludge, Mike would go first. One camera operator described how, on their third week of filming, the team arrived at a wastewater treatment plant, where the stench was so overwhelming that half the crew gagged within minutes. But Mike? He smiled, grabbed a shovel, and said, "If they can handle this every day, so can we." That moment, the crew said, defined what Dirty Jobs was really about: respect, endurance, and authenticity, no matter how uncomfortable things got. There were no safety scripts either. Each new location brought new risks: toxic fumes, unstable ground, venomous animals, and heavy machinery that could crush a man in seconds. According to one producer, Mike's biggest fear wasn't danger, it was faking it. He believed that the audience could smell dishonesty, and he was determined to make sure Dirty Jobs stayed as real as possible. That stubborn dedication often left the crew shaking their heads, torn between admiration and fear. The show's early success shocked everyone. Viewers couldn't get enough of the genuine grit and humor Mike brought to every episode. But behind that charm was a man constantly pushing the limits of safety, of endurance, and sometimes of sanity. Crew members recall nights when Mike would collapse on the floor of their makeshift motel rooms, exhausted, his clothes still caked with mud. Yet even then, he'd be writing notes for the next day's shoot, determined to make sure the workers' stories were told the right way. The show quickly evolved from entertainment into something deeper, a raw documentary of working-class America, seen through the eyes of a man who refused to pretend. Every episode became a test of willpower, not just for Mike, but for everyone on his team. "He never asked us to do something he wouldn't do himself," one crew member said. "That's why we followed him into the worst places imaginable." But as Dirty Jobs grew in popularity, the stakes kept rising. What started as a celebration of hard work was slowly turning into a series of life-threatening adventures. The audience saw laughter, mud, and camaraderie. But what they didn't see were the moments of panic, fear, and near disaster that came once the cameras stopped. And soon, those unseen moments would begin to take a toll on everyone involved, leading to close calls that would forever change how the crew saw Mike Rowe. What fans never saw on television were the struggles that unfolded when the cameras weren't rolling. The laughter, jokes, and quick edits made it all look easy, but behind every episode of Dirty Jobs was a crew pushed to their breaking point. Long hours, grueling weather, and unpredictable work environments tested everyone's endurance. From scorching heat in open fields to freezing nights deep underground, the team endured it all to capture reality in its rawest form. Crew members often slept in vans, skipped meals, and worked with barely any rest, while Mike stayed right beside them every step of the way. One producer revealed that during the show's early seasons, several shoots almost had to be canceled because of unsafe conditions. Collapsing tunnels, malfunctioning equipment, and dangerous animals were regular occurrences. Yet Mike was always the first to reassure everyone that they could make it through. He had this strange calm, one cameraman recalled. Even when everything was going wrong, Mike would crack a joke and somehow make you believe it'd all work out. That attitude kept morale alive when exhaustion and fear set in. But it came at a cost. Mike was known for pushing through pain. Whether it was chemical burns, infections, or pulled muscles, he rarely complained. On one occasion, while filming an episode about snake removal, Mike was bitten through his glove. The injury didn't make it into the final cut, but crew members remember how his hand swelled almost immediately. He refused medical treatment until the day's shoot was done, telling his team, "If the locals can handle it, I can too." The camera operators were often in just as much danger. Many recall being inches away from spinning machinery, hanging off cliffs, or knee-deep in toxic sludge, all while keeping the lens focused on Mike. There were moments I thought, "This is it. This is the one that ends us," one cameraman admitted, but Mike made us believe every crazy moment was worth it. The show's rawness made it a hit, but few people realized how much suffering went into creating that authenticity. Between shoots, Mike often checked on his crew personally, ensuring everyone was mentally okay before the next challenge. "He never acted like a TV host," said one sound engineer. "He was one of us, tired, dirty, and determined to keep going." But behind Mike's reassuring smile was a man carrying more stress than anyone knew. The relentless pace, the danger, and the responsibility to represent American workers truthfully were starting to wear on him. Crew members began to notice him getting quieter, staying up late alone after wrap, writing in his journal, or recording thoughts for future narration. What he never told them was how deeply the experiences affected him, the people he met, the risks he took, and the emotional weight of the stories he was telling. It was becoming clear that Dirty Jobs wasn't just a show. It was a mission, one that demanded everything from those brave enough to film it. As the years went on, the physical and emotional toll of Dirty Jobs began to reveal itself in ways no one could ignore. What fans saw on screen, the laughter, the wisecracks, the fearless attitude, hid the truth of just how close Mike and his crew came to disaster more times than anyone ever knew. They weren't filming in controlled environments or Hollywood sets. They were walking into real danger, day after day, for the sake of authenticity. One of the most terrifying moments came during the filming of a wastewater treatment episode. As Mike worked inside a massive underground tank, a machinery malfunction triggered a sudden surge of water. Within seconds, the tank began to flood. The crew dropped their cameras and rushed to pull Mike out, fearing the worst. For over a minute, communication was lost. When they finally found him, soaked and gasping, Mike brushed it off with a laugh and said, "Guess we just found the dirtiest job of all." But the crew later admitted it was the closest they'd ever come to tragedy. Incidents like that weren't rare. During a mining segment, toxic gas alarms suddenly went off mid-shoot, forcing the entire team to evacuate. On another occasion, Mike slipped while standing on a slick beam in a steel mill, catching himself just in time before a deadly fall. These moments were never shown on TV, edited out to keep the show lighthearted. But for the crew, they were haunting reminders that danger was always one mistake away. Yet, despite the near-death experiences, Mike's resilience never wavered. He saw each episode as a responsibility to represent the people doing these jobs every single day, without recognition. His determination inspired the crew to keep going, even when they were terrified. One sound technician said, "Every time we thought it was too much, Mike would look at us and say, 'If these folks can wake up and do it again tomorrow, so can we.'" That kind of leadership kept everyone grounded, but it also came at a personal cost. The weight of seeing the hardship of real workers, combined with constant travel and danger, began to wear Mike down. Behind the laughter was a man who was often exhausted, sometimes emotionally shaken, and quietly questioning how much longer he could keep going. There were nights when he'd sit alone after filming, replaying the day's events in silence. One crew member recalled finding him once by a campfire, staring into the flames and muttering, "You can only fake being fearless for so long." The next morning, he was back to joking and smiling as if nothing had happened. That was Mike's way, burying the fear, focusing on the mission, and leading by example. What no one outside that crew ever knew was that the bond they shared became unbreakable because of those close calls. Every danger faced together forged loyalty and trust that would last a lifetime. But as the seasons went on, those moments of survival began to weigh heavier, hinting that something deep inside Mike Rowe was starting to change. As Dirty Jobs exploded into one of Discovery Channel's biggest hits, new pressures began to surface, not just from the danger, but from behind the scenes. The higher the ratings climbed, the more the network demanded. Bigger challenges, riskier stunts, more drama. But for Mike Rowe and his crew, it was never supposed to be about showmanship. It was about truth. That clash of values began to create friction, and soon, tensions started building where there had once been only brotherhood. The crew was fiercely loyal to Mike, but they were also exhausted. Endless travel, physical strain, and constant exposure to danger left tempers short. Producers pushed for episodes that looked more intense or more dangerous, while the crew worried that they were crossing the line between bravery and recklessness. One longtime cameraman admitted, "There were days we'd beg Mike not to do something. He'd just grin and say, 'If I don't do it, it's not real.' That's who he was." Mike's commitment to authenticity was unwavering, but it also put him at odds with safety protocols. During one shoot inside an unstable grain silo, the crew insisted on pulling him out when they noticed shifting debris. Mike refused until they got the full shot. Later, the footage aired, but the tension between them never quite faded. "We were angry because we cared," said the same cameraman. "He'd risk his life for one scene, and we couldn't stop him." Yet even in those heated moments, Mike always found a way to bring everyone back together. After long, dangerous days, he'd invite the crew to dinner, usually at a roadside diner or a motel parking lot barbecue. There, they'd talk, laugh, and decompress. No matter what happened, one sound tech recalled. "Mike made sure we ended the day as a team. He said, 'If we can't trust each other, we don't belong out there.'" That sense of unity became the show's backbone. They were more than co-workers. They were family bound by sweat, fear, and respect. Still, the emotional strain was undeniable. The longer they worked, the more they saw how the fame of Dirty Jobs was changing everything. Producers started sending more staff, publicists appeared on site, and suddenly, the small, tight-knit group that once traveled together felt invaded by outsiders. The crew admitted they missed the early days when it was just them, the cameras, and Mike's dry humor holding it all together. Through every argument, though, Mike's loyalty never wavered. He defended his team against studio pressure, often threatening to walk off set if anyone disrespected the people behind the lens. He'd tell executives, "No crew, no show," one producer revealed, and he meant it. That kind of leadership earned Mike lifelong loyalty, even in disagreement. The fights were real, but so was the love. It was a bond built not in luxury, but in dirt, danger, and shared purpose. One that would be tested again and again as Dirty Jobs reached its peak. For every episode of Dirty Jobs that aired, there were hours of footage no one ever saw. And according to the crew, some of the most powerful moments were the ones that ended up on the cutting room floor. While audiences saw Mike Rowe laughing, joking, and tackling impossible tasks, what was hidden were the emotional, vulnerable moments that revealed who he truly was. Producers often trimmed scenes that didn't fit the entertaining tone, but the crew says those were the moments that made the show real. One editor confessed that some of the most heartfelt exchanges, like when Mike comforted a grieving worker who'd lost a co-worker in an accident, or when he quietly thanked an elderly farmer for 60 years of labor, were never shown. They weren't flashy enough, the editor said, but they were the essence of Mike. Behind the light-hearted tone, the truth was that Dirty Jobs was deeply emotional. The show often brought Mike face-to-face with stories of loss, sacrifice, and generational hardship. After filming, he'd sometimes sit with workers for hours, long after the cameras stopped rolling, just listening to their stories. Many of those conversations were too personal for TV, and Mike fought to protect them from being turned into entertainment. According to one producer, Mike argued with the network multiple times about how the show should portray laborers. He wanted the tone to honor their dignity, not exploit their struggles. "Mike didn't want pity," said the producer. "He wanted respect." Sometimes, those battles meant certain scenes never made it to air, no matter how meaningful they were. One cameraman recalled a moment when Mike broke down after filming in a factory where several workers had recently been injured. The exhaustion and emotion finally caught up to him, and for the first time, the crew saw him cry. He told us, "These people don't need sympathy. They need recognition." We turned off the camera and just let him be human. But the audience never saw that side of him. It wasn't part of the brand. Even years later, crew members regret that so many of those raw, human scenes were hidden from the public. Those were the moments that showed what the show really meant. Not the mud or the stunts, but the people, one said. Still, Mike's influence extended far beyond what was edited out. Off-camera, he often returned to help the workers he met, paying for tools, donating to small businesses, or connecting them with opportunities through his foundation. He never asked for credit, and the network rarely mentioned it. To him, it wasn't about publicity. It was about purpose. And while the world loved the humor and chaos of Dirty Jobs, his crew knew that the truest version of the show was buried in the footage no one ever saw. The version where Mike Rowe's compassion spoke louder than his fame. Away from the lights and microphones, Mike Rowe was a completely different kind of television host, one who didn't crave fame or attention. According to his crew, the Mike they knew off-camera was quieter, more reflective, and deeply philosophical about the meaning of work. When filming stopped, he wasn't rushing to interviews or red carpets. He was sitting beside mechanics, farmers, and factory workers, asking questions most celebrities wouldn't think to ask. He wanted to understand people, one sound operator said. Not just what they did, but why they did it. After long days of shooting, when others were resting, Mike could often be found at local diners with his crew, talking about what they had witnessed that day. He spoke about the pride in a welder's hands, the silence of a farmer's struggle, and the unseen dignity of janitors and sewer workers. He saw poetry in labor, and it changed how the crew viewed their own jobs. He made us see value in the things the world ignores, a cameraman recalled. That attitude bled into everything he did. When the cameras weren't rolling, Mike stayed in touch with many of the people they filmed with, sending handwritten letters, checking in on families, and even attending funerals when tragedy struck. He never did it for publicity, said a producer. He did it because he cared. His humility became a quiet inspiration for everyone around him. The crew often joked that Mike was the philosopher of dirt. During their travels, he'd read passages from old books, quoting thinkers about work, purpose, and the soul of America. It wasn't uncommon for him to pause during a road trip and give a spontaneous speech about how every job mattered, that the nation depended on people whose names no one would ever know. But that same passion sometimes left him burdened. Crew members said that the more he saw, the more it weighed on him. The struggles of hardworking Americans, the decline of trade professions, and the growing cultural disconnect between labor and respect. He felt like he had to be their voice, one producer said. He carried that responsibility everywhere we went. Even as Dirty Jobs grew into a global brand, Mike avoided the celebrity lifestyle. He didn't own an entourage or demand luxury. He stayed in the same budget motels as the crew and shared meals with them at gas stations and truck stops. When producers offered him a private trailer, he declined, saying, "If the crew's sweating in the heat, I'm not sitting in air conditioning." It was that integrity that made his team fiercely loyal. They knew Mike wasn't performing for the camera. He was living what he preached. Behind every laugh and muddy handshake was a man driven by gratitude and grounded by humility. But as the years passed, those ideals and the unrelenting pace of the show began to test him in ways even he couldn't ignore. The cracks were starting to show, and soon the crew would witness the moment Mike finally hit his breaking point. After years of non-stop filming, travel, and physical punishment, Mike Rowe finally began to feel the weight of everything he'd endured. The dirt, the danger, and the endless pressure to deliver something real were taking a toll not just on his body, but on his spirit. Crew members started noticing subtle changes. The fatigue in his voice, the quiet moments when he'd sit alone after filming, staring out into the distance. One producer said, "He was still smiling for the camera, but you could tell something was cracking underneath." The schedule had become relentless. They were filming across multiple states within days, sleeping only a few hours at a time, often in freezing barns or sweltering factories. Mike never complained, but his body began to. There were episodes where he worked through severe back pain, bronchitis, and exhaustion. He'd push himself past his limit because he didn't want to disappoint anyone, said one crew member. But behind that commitment was a man reaching the edge of burnout. During the final years of the original run, Mike confided to his team that he felt trapped between the heart of the show and the demands of television. "It was never supposed to be about ratings," he said one night over dinner. "It was supposed to be about people." That conversation stuck with his crew, because it was the first time he had ever admitted he might walk away. When Dirty Jobs ended, in 2012, many fans assumed it was cancelled because of ratings. But those close to him knew the truth. It was Mike's decision. He needed time to breathe, to step back from the chaos and rediscover what the show had truly meant. For him, Dirty Jobs had been more than entertainment. It had been a mission to restore respect for hard work. The years of danger, conflict, and emotion had changed him profoundly, and walking away was the only way to protect what he stood for. The crew supported him fully, even though they knew it was the end of an era. As one of them put it, he didn't quit, he evolved. What came next would prove that Mike Rowe's legacy was never just about getting dirty. It was about reminding America of the dignity in doing so. Years after the cameras stopped rolling, Mike Rowe's crew finally began speaking openly about what those years truly meant, and what they saw in the man who led them through it all. They said Dirty Jobs wasn't just a show. It was a life-changing experience that reshaped their view of work, humility, and resilience. "He showed us that dignity doesn't wear a suit," one cameraman said. "It wears overalls, gloves, and steel-toed boots." The crew described Mike as both leader and brother, someone who never asked for loyalty but earned it every day through action. They remember his ability to make them laugh when exhaustion hit, his calm voice in moments of danger, and his deep respect for the everyday Americans whose stories they told. Off-screen, Mike kept the mission alive through his foundation, Mike Rowe Works, which provides scholarships and support for skilled trades. "That's the side of Mike most people never saw," one producer said. "Even when the show ended, his message didn't." For the crew, their years together became a badge of honor. They had endured toxic fumes, collapsing tunnels, and sleepless nights. But they'd also witnessed something rare. A man who practiced everything he preached about hard work and gratitude. Many still keep photos from the road, mud-stained and faded, reminders of the days when they captured the heartbeat of working America. When asked what Mike's true legacy was, one longtime sound engineer said, "He didn't make dirty jobs famous. He made the people who do them matter." Today, Mike continues to speak for those unseen workers, reminding the world that real heroes don't chase fame. They build, fix, and serve quietly. And for the crew that once followed him into danger, there's no doubt. Mike Rowe didn't just make a show. He built a movement that still echoes far beyond the screen.